Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey!
Got
Slightly delayed.
Yeah.
I'm several thousand miles away.
It's the principles of simultaneity.
We don't have an Ansible. If only we had an
Kind
Ansible.
of do have an Ansible.
That's true. It's getting close.
It's afternoon over there, right?
Yeah, coming into evening. Yeah, late afternoon.
evening.
But it's also the present.
That's true.
It's also the present. Let's introduce ourselves.
I'm Haley.
I'm Lori.
I'm Amy.
And special guest,
I'm Redfern.
Yay!
Redfern. Thank you for joining us. Redfern, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your work as our special guest today?
Yeah, totally. So I'm Redfern Jon Barrett. I am a non-binary author, originally from the UK. I now live in Berlin, in Germany. And I tend to write stories around queer and non-binary experiences. I had a novel out last year called Proud Pink Sky.
Yeah, you did.
It's I did indeed. And yeah, that sort of explored the world's first gay state and was looking at trans, non-binary, bi issues within what a gay sort of government would look like. Yeah, and I've also written some non-binary romantic comedy about polyamory called The Giddy Death of the Gays and the Strange Demise of Straights. So I write very weird fiction, basically.
I'm picturing that being sort of like a French farce. Like, oh, my lover went in that door and another one came out the other door. Nobody's talking to each other.
Like Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
When they were, like, running.
Speculative fiction needs more Scooby-Doo. Because in the end, it's
Cool.
always just a person in a mask, so...
Well, and Scooby-Doo and Shaggy always shuffle a sandwich like a deck of cards.
Redfern, I read your book last year. I got it in, and I really enjoyed it. I got it in the
Oh, thank you.
Strange Horizons fundraiser.
Yes.
I was doing the Strange Horizons fundraiser, and it said pick a gift, and I had read The Echo Wife, I think, was one of the books on there, and I was like, oh, I love that. I'm going to get that. And then I was like, wait a minute, I've already read it. So I was like, why don't I get a free book that I haven't read? So I started reading reviews of the various books that were on offer, and yours just had such glowing reviews, and I was like, wow, I've really got to read this. So
Yeah, I'm really touched by that. People have been really, really sweet.
I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I picked it. So I picked it, and then I forgot I did the fundraiser. A few months later, once the Kickstarter was done, the book showed up in the mail, and I was like, wow, I got a mystery book in the mail. It took me maybe about half an hour to kind of go, like speaking of Scooby-Doo. And then I was like, oh yeah, I asked for this book. And I read it. It's autographed by you, unless you outsourced the autographing, but I bet you probably didn't.
Sadly, no, I can't quite afford an autograph right now.
And I really, really enjoyed it. And then this was my first reading of The Dispossessed, and I see a lot of parallels there. So maybe we can talk about
I
that.
want to talk about the
Absolutely.
word ambitopian
Yeah.
when we get there.
When we get there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Redfern, because I don't want to forget, where can people find you on the internet, which would normally go at the end of the episode, but I'm afraid I'm going to forget. So where can people find you?
So I'm on Blue Sky at Redfern, I think. If you just search Redfern Jon Barrett, I'll come up. I'm also on Mastodon, sort of the geeky social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a website as well that links to all these things. That's redjon.com, redjon.com. It's very short.
Cool. All right. Shall we?
Let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
Alrighty. This is our second Ursula K book on the podcast. Very fun. And we read this month The Dispossessed, which won the Hugo Award in 1975. It also is one of the few books that has also won the Nebula and the Locus Awards. Little tripartite glory there.
Ooh.
All right, plot summary. Shavik, a physicist from the anarcho-syndicalist moon of Anaris, travels to the nearby planet of Arras as a sort of honored guest and to share his research. The novel is told in two parts, the present to the future on Arras, focused on his experience there and how it's a capitalist nightmare, while the other focuses on Shavik's history on Anaris leading up to his departure. Told in both ways, we get a very detailed look at life in both places. Arras has lush, beautiful land, technology, fancy colleges, and also a dark side with poverty and misery. Anaris is a dry, dusty place with only subsistence farming. It's Tatooine in my mind from Star Wars. But the people are joined together in mutual aid and assistance. Nobody owns anything and everything is shared. Despite this, life is still very hard and not exactly a walk in the park. Shevik eventually learns the truth about Arras and is disgusted with it and manages to escape thanks to the Terran Federation's embassy. The technology that he was working on, he decides to give away to the galaxy, so Arras can't get the upper hand in military tech, and he returns home.
Good job.
I'm already fascinated because I pronounced every single word differently. Than
Oh, really?
What is language? What is language?
I think this book asks that question.
It does.
Yeah. I mean, I almost wrote my review in Pravik to make it more equitable, but
This is the book that I have read.
yeah.
I'm trying to think.
The copy I'm using.
The copy that I am
This is the
using.
book that we read together. All right, let's do goodies from Goodreads. This is one of those books that's very hard to criticize.
Yeah.
Ooh, they found a way, though.
Yeah, so Chaunceston Bird gave it 2 stars. Big ideas, but presented slow and clunky. I feel like I ordered a burger that everybody has been recommending, and it turned out to be a soggy slider from White Castle. So,
Damn.
yeah, Redford, White Castle, and Crystal in America are maybe some of like the
Really
least
cheap, right?
Yeah,
Cheap, but depending on who you are, delicious.
yeah,
Oh, depending on the time of day and the situation.
yeah. At night they taste 100% better. But yeah, that's not a compliment to say it's a White Castle.
I'm going to take that as a compliment because I just think when you steam it all together, it becomes this collective unification of a sandwich.
So I don't eat meat, and I haven't in a long time, but I
Same,
remember
yeah.
the
Oh, I
Crystal
love them.
Burger as a kid, and they're the perfect size for your little hands.
They have onions. I eat them sober in daylight hours.
The little onions are really good. The little
love them.
tiny chopped onions, I remember.
They're just dehydrated onions rehydrated. I love them. Yeah, so that was my White Castle goodie.
Let's go on. I mean, there were so many good ones, particularly by men.
Yeah.
I think the one where David on Amazon, who gave it 1 star, said the title is "Hate Le Guin Sci-Fi."
Oh,
so you know it's going somewhere good. But I think my favorite part was where he said, "I don't understand how Le Guin can write such a masterpiece of fantasy literature, Earthsea, with action and depth and such an amazing plot, and then also turn out this sci-fi philosophical trash." I know she is trying to be like Heinlein, who is also very libertarian and preachy, but Heinlein, on the other hand, is a good storyteller and drives his novels through action and clever dialogue with many twists and turns, and usually a very cool, unexpected ending. Le Guin's novels have none of that.
This has killed me. I need to go lie down.
Also, Le Guin is not a libertarian.
I think there were 2 others I just want to touch on. One was
Yeah.
where Sonny just said hokey. And the one that said that this book was offensively stupid to an atheist reader. I have so many questions. about
Okay.
that one. I have so many questions.
Where do you start with that?
Are we talking about the same book?
I would prefer just being like, it's dumb. At least that's an opinion.
Offensive. It's offensive.
Don't like her name.
Yeah. It starts with a U.
Okay. So when I was looking at Goodreads, I felt like all of the reviews were so long, and I was like, I ain't reading all that. So I was kind of skimming through them to get a couple
have a lot of thoughts.
of little zingers. Well, and a lot of them were like thoughtful, even if I didn't agree with them. They were sort of scholarly.
Oh, I went right to the one.
reviews. And I should have just gone to the ones. The 2s are people are working hard in the 2 stars. So Abe gave it 2 stars and said, "If a book is written poorly, I will not be able to enjoy it. For all this book is cracked up to be politically and scientifically, the writing style is awkward, clunky, stilted, disagreeable, full of lists. Did I mention lists? Oh God, not more lists and lists."
There
And
were lists.
then Not Getting Enough wrote a very long review, and within that review had the XKCD cartoon where there's the graph of the probability of the book is good on the left side, and then going across the bottom, it says number of words made up by author. Complaining about all the words made up.
I'm screwed by that equation.
I mean, have they read any sci-fi or fantasy?
Yeah, I'll put it on social media since audio is not the best way for people to
I think
engage
people like
with
the description.
a graph.
See the x-axis.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I'm saying left side and bottom because I don't remember what's an x-axis and a y-axis.
This has a name too when it goes down like this, but I don't remember it.
A curve?
It's a downward sloping curve to imply that the book is not very good.
The technical term.
A technical term, not very good. Okay, that's all I have. Oh, Redfern, do you have any?
So I looked through the Goodreads reviews, and they've kind of all blurred together in my mind.
Yep.
So I can't
fine.
distinguish them.
That's
I mean, I
perfectly
think
fine.
there are some like fair criticisms of the
Sure.
book, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it's really, really impossible to separate, I think, a book that is this political, written by a figure like Ursula K, from like just people's like basic prejudices or biases. You know, I don't have any funny quotes though.
That's okay.
I was going to say that is way more thoughtful than we typically get, which I like. But
I think most of the criticism that I read was like, people just thought it was kind of boring.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very philosophical book.
I bounced off of it the first time I read it for exactly that reason. But as often happens when we read something for the podcast that forces me to finish it and pay attention to it, by the end I was like, oh, I love this book.
Yeah.
But I'm getting ahead of our segments. So
That's true.
I will say the list thing, actually, I noticed it while I was reading the book, and it actually gave me a little bit of a fuzzy feeling, nice little fuzzy feeling.
Oh.
Much like the skin of the Anaresti. It reminded me of the girl with the dragon tattoo.
Oh, yeah. When she goes shopping at IKEA and they list
you learn
everything.
every single thing and every ingredient in all of her sandwiches. Yeah.
I made so many sandwiches when I was reading that book because it was winter, and I was like, she's always putting hard-boiled eggs on bread, and I just did that. Had coffee with it. It was great.
I didn't notice the list in this book, which made me think, did I read it? Did I pay attention? I didn't notice.
I remember
literally thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't read
It's like, what lists are we talking
I
about?
could find one.
My fantastical food is a list of food items they had at Shevik's going away party, but I didn't notice the list.
Yeah, there was a couple. It wasn't as heavy as some other books I've read.
It was definitely not Girl with the Dragon Tattoo level.
No. It's definitely not Ready Player One, which is like, here's movies.
Some songs that were popular in the 80s. All of them.
I was pretty sure I was going to be able to turn right to one, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Well,
further proof that maybe there's not as many as that guy thought.
yeah.
So, all right, my first
QED.
discussion question is, this book is subtitled An Ambiguous Utopia, as it is made perhaps a little unclear which of these societies is actually preferable. And I think both are not preferable. I think there's parts in each that are admirable or desirable, but
Haley, that is also my very first bullet point.
I don't have a subtitle.
it's not in every book, but it's on Wikipedia.
It was in some publications.
What the heck?
It said on Wikipedia that readers and reviewers were referring to it as an ambiguous utopia, and then at some point it was published with that as a subtitle. But I don't think
Interesting.
it did. I did not have the impression
Linguistic determinism.
Yeah.
Ambiguous utopia.
Oh,
Yeah,
this is why I
discuss.
wanted to talk about ambitopia.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's a good
Yay.
segue.
Can you tell us what an ambitopia is, Red?
An ambitopia is a world that combines the extremes of a utopia and a dystopia. I wrote an article on this for Vector, British Science Fiction Association's magazine, because I think that there's a lot of downsides to both utopia and dystopia. And I think that we have a lot to gain through viewing things through the lens of ambitopia. And, you know, I like to invent words. So
I love that word.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to the podcast Utopia? Anybody?
I have not.
Okay. So utopia is actually doesn't mean utopia. It was sort of a criticism in a way of how there is no way to ever make a utopia. Like, you can't do it.
The definition of utopia is no place.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, it's not possible to make a utopia. And so it's the fact that we now have utopia and dystopia, which is probably also not a thing, is endlessly interesting to me. And I think that humans spend a lot of time trying to think of ways to make things better.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that we have that idea. But I like the idea of an ambitopia a lot because most anything we do is kind of both and neither.
Yeah. I think our society is an ambitopia. We have air conditioning and racism.
Right.
We have really good things in our society. We have really horrible things in our society. So,
Also, air conditioning gives us climate change.
yeah.
So everything has a cost.
And one thing, the ambassador, the Terran ambassador that Shevik meets up with at the end talks about the differences, like the wild differences between goods and bads in Eurus, about how it has all these human foibles happening and everybody's doing bad, but it also has this paradisical like aspect to it too. So I think that's very much alive and well in this book. I don't know. And Anaris is another one. It's like there's all this ideal that people can't help but undermine it in a way because we're people.
There's human nature. Yeah, like, I mean, you share everything, but once you couple off, like, you're allowed to have, like, your own room because you have to have privacy for the sex acts or whatever.
Copulation.
Copulation.
Yeah.
Which I kind of loved the fact that she tried so hard to find a word that said sex, but in a mutuality. Like both people were doing a thing.
Oh, that's true.
One person
the
wasn't
code
sexting on
prefix.
another.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can only take a plural subject
Right.
with the verb in provic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask everybody what parts of Anaris they liked. Like, did they think was an ideal, and which parts did they think was terrible?
Redfern, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, I think that there's the economic aspects is kind of easy with Inaris, right? It's like there's a certain base level equality. No one is allowed to go hungry. I mean, that's quite an easy one. I mean, I read this book like 10 years ago, and I think that it is an ambitopia as well. I didn't find myself liking Inaris as much as I did the first time I read it, and I really feel like completely mixed about the society that's presented there. And I think that some of the worst things about it, actually, in terms of gender, which I know we're going to talk about, but it's very, very binary. And I know that this was written it was published in 1972. But Marge Piercy's Woman at the Edge of Time was published in 1974, and I'm obsessed with that book.
Mm-hmm. I read that in high school. It was mind blowing.
I love it. It's so. I mean, I've given papers on it. I'm a massive Marge Piercy stan as well, and that has like a much more sort of forward-thinking view of gender in the book. So I actually found that, I mean, of course, like in the Dispossessed, I think that it's great that there's a lot of same-sex sexual relationships as well as opposite, and they're not really distinguished between. I think there's a couple of points in the language where it kind of sounds like, I think there was one or 2 points making note, it sounds like homosexuality might be pathologized here a bit.
Yeah.
But I think it's just like all the boys split off together and the girls seem to split off together, and it felt a little bit too gender binary. That's
so
society.
Funny. I had the opposite reaction, which is just fascinating. When I first read it, I hated Inaris. I thought it sounded bleak and terrible, and nobody could be themselves, and it was awful. I read it this time, I'm like, no, wait, this actually sounds kind of great. And like my reaction to the man, like the gender dynamic. So she wrote Left Hand of Darkness before she wrote this one. Yeah. So she kind of had already talked, I think, about the gender thing, I think, and I'm wondering if she was trying with the NRSD to like explore what that would look like if it was just people, like human people, because there is no distinction in the sense of like adorning yourself for the other person or and there's no difference in work. Like socially, there's no difference, right? Nobody is treated differently because they're a man or a woman. There is still men and women, which I think is the starting problem. But they kind of explored a little bit when he gets down to Eurus. He's like, so wait, women can't do what men can do, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if she succeeded, but in my mind, I think that was her attempt to explore that, like the gender difference. But I don't know if she was successful. But I responded to it more this time around than I did the first time around, I think. I
found an article where she talked about her writing in the 70s and 60s versus in her later books. So the 2 books she won the Hugo for both have male main characters. And she said, what I'd been doing as a writer was being a woman pretending to think like a man. I had to rethink my entire approach to writing fiction. It was important to think about privilege and power and domination in terms of gender, which was something science fiction and fantasy had not done, which I think is true.
Yeah, I wondered about so I've read 3 of her books. The novella, Word for World is Forest, which will always be hard for me to say.
Yeah.
Word for World. I prefer the original title, Little Green Men, simply because it's easier to say. And then Left Hand, and then this. And I was thinking to myself as I was reading this, what does it mean that she always, well, maybe not always, but in my experience, examines her worlds through a male main character? And I came up with, I don't know, because I think that the female characters in this book are good characters. I like Takver. I think she's interesting. I think she's very much herself. She does not strike me as just like the girlfriend, who's only there for him.
Yeah.
And I like his daughters. I like his relationship with his daughters. But I just was thinking about it. I was like, what does it mean that we always examine these worlds through a male lens? And I don't know. I didn't answer that question. But it was something I noticed and wondered about. And I guess I'd like to read some of her later reading to see where she goes with that. But on the subject of the binary in this book, I think she kind of undercuts herself in some ways, because there's a lot of talking about how women are equal, we're all the same. And I mean, that's good. Saying that is an important part of making that real. But the part where they're kids, there were parts in this book that made me laugh out loud, which I did not expect. And one of them was when they're kids and the Let's see. It says, everywhere the boys looked, they saw girls. They had tried copulating with girls. Some of them, in despair, had also tried not copulating with girls. It made no difference. The girls were there. That was very funny to me. But also, it's like, people are very aware in this society from a young age of these differences between girls and boys, and that's really all there is. And so when I was reading this, I was thinking, was this written before Left Hand? Because in Left Hand, she's doing, I know. Yeah, I looked it up and I was like, oh, this almost seems like an earlier exploration of gender than Left Hand, which surprised me a little bit.
It was based on a short story, so maybe.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. So that short story maybe was written before, because she said it was the worst short story she'd ever written, and she kind of put it in a drawer and stepped away from it for a long time.
We've all been there.
Sometimes I think, Ursula, by the end, becomes like, a feminist paragon of science fiction excellence, but is it too much sometimes for us to put on every single woman to carry the feminist flag? Maybe?
Oh, for sure.
She was very adamant she wasn't a feminist.
Really?
Which is a whole thing.
Yeah, which
I
is
didn't
funny.
know that.
Yeah.
I know. I think it was very 70s reactionary thing to like the word itself, probably. I think Ursula K. was a feminist.
Yeah,
whether you like it or
whether
not.
she likes it or not. She may not believe in feminism, but feminism believes in her.
Yeah, and she's also, for as, far thinking as she was, a product of
100%.
Which is 70 years ago.
So all over this book, just
100%.
that, which is, I want to talk about linguistic relativity.
Well, that's one of my questions is the effect of language on political thought and also life.
Yeah, so do you know about this? Let me not get it wrong.
Is it the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis?
Yes.
I love it.
Hold on. So the Sapir-Whorf, Sapir-Whorf, I don't know how to pronounce it. Sapirwhorf
I think it's Sapir-Whorf.
hypothesis.
Yeah.
It says basically that your language controls or dictates or has a big impact on how you see the world, right? So the language you grow up speaking will limit to a degree, I think, how you can the elastic way you can see the world. So
that
like
makes sense.
Yeah, so Chevette growing up with this Odonian language really impacts the way he interacts with and understands Euros and vice versa, I think. It is fascinating. Why did I just bring this up? What'd you just say?
The effect of language on political thought and also just daily life. So we were texting each other over the past week. It's like, use the spoon that I use instead of saying my spoon, which is funny because, a lot of times I do own spoons. But
a lot of times?
I know.
Some days you own spoons, some days you don't.
Well, sometimes when I'm at a restaurant, I don't own that spoon. But I would still
Sometimes
say,
that is the spoon you use.
hand me my spoon. Oh, I know.
Right?
Yeah.
Temporarily, it's your spoon.
But they also do this in languages like French. So in French, you don't say, like, if you're a teacher, you say, raise your hand. She would say, raise the hand. Because how could you raise somebody else's hand? But that's not about ownership.
It's implied that it's your hand.
Also, like in other languages, you say things like, I have hunger instead of, I am hungry.
Yeah, I have thirst.
Which it's interesting that if you say, I am hungry, it's like that's all you become. You are controlled by this hunger that you can no longer ignore. But if you just have hunger, it's just a part of you. It's just one part of who you are.
Yeah, and that leads us to person-centered language, too. So, like, it's not an autistic person, it's a person with autism. It puts the person first, which is very important as we shift as a society to.
Although there is pushback against person-first language.
Yeah, that's true. That's
why.
Just,
what?
Yeah.
For example, for a while, it was encouraged to say person with a disability instead of disabled person. And I've heard many people in that community say, I don't carry a disability around in a suitcase with me. I am disabled. It's okay to call me a disabled person. So there's, as with anything, there's a significant difference of opinion amongst people in that community. And I'm not in that community, so I don't get a vote. And that's fine. I don't need a vote. But I've seen both sides of that.
And it might, it's better than it was 20 years ago, the things we used to say, and it's going to keep evolving too, as language always does. So.
Yeah.
Relativity.
Relativity is what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Well, linguistic relativity.
Relativity. Yeah.
I was like, oh no, are we doing space and time? I can't keep up.
Well, we might do a little because relativity does factor into this book.
Yeah.
Well, I have a list of things that this book made me think of. And so Proud Pink Sky was one of them. Mm-hmm. The Wall by friend of the pod, Gautam Bhatia, which I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I've never heard him say it, so I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. I hope so. The Wall, which, in here they say, the wall. And I know that he was heavily influenced by Le Guin, or is heavily influenced by Le Guin.
So probably not accidental.
So probably not accidental. And I also thought about Dune when we get
yeah.
toward the end. Like the principle of simultaneity, it's giving Kwisatz Haderach. It's big Paul Atreides energy. Everything's happening all at once.
It's also good. Because you're seeing the many possible futures, but you can control them, but you can't kind of. Maybe they're all happening right now. How can we know?
Yeah, we experience them like they're happening in order, but they could all be happening at the same time.
I really liked the idea of the fact of that there is actually no past, present, and future. That's just the way our brains interpret time and space. I love that idea.
Oh, it's like how color is something that's processed in your rods and your cones. It's not
real.
inherent to the thing.
But it also makes me think of deja vu. So like
A glitch in the Matrix.
a glitch in the Matrix, like that thing that we're experiencing as having happened in the past, but that is happening to us right this moment is a really interesting illustration of that idea that like our brain can't parse for a second whether something's happening right now or it happened before.
Oh.
And so you just sort of bounce for a second and then it's really weird and then you come back around.
Yeah.
I read a book recently by physicists called The Order of Time.
You did?
I do.
Did you read the whole thing?
I did. Yeah, I mean, most of it, yeah. Who finishes a nonfiction book? There's too many words. So it's called The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli, and it's a mindfuck, but in a good way. But what I learned about it and what I take away is that time is something that we created. And in places where there is no change, like most of what time is the perception of change. So like if you were in space in the middle of nowhere, it would be hard to delineate time. Like we created clocks. Clocks aren't natural. Like nature doesn't care about time. But like so much of what we perceive to be time is just the change of things. Like entropy as if you lived the same day with nothing changing at all time wouldn't matter. So
I like
Groundhog Day.
I like the discussion of babies and how they don't perceive time.
I like that too.
And it has something to do with the ability to understand that our present actions will have ramifications.
yeah.
And then to be able to look back and say, that thing I did had this ramification, and then to learn how to do that going forward. And not every species can do that.
That's true.
I loved that discussion that we get toward the end of the book at Vea's party. So I feel like the beginning of the book, and part of the reason I bounced off of it is so much like kids in a room having college thoughts. And I was like, okay. And I kind of was just bored and I didn't finish it.
I love that part in college, but not now.
Of course. right. I'm not in college anymore. Everyone needs to leave college thoughts behind.
Yeah.
But then when you get later into the book, and I mean, that's a natural progression, is that Shevik's thinking about things and talking about things gets more sophisticated, and a lot of it is way over my head. But I really enjoyed that part when he's at this dinner party and he's talking about the baby doesn't understand the difference in now and not now. And he says, seeing the difference between now and not now, we can make the connection. And then morality enters in and responsibility. And he goes along to talk about this. But then I thought, imagine the irony of pontificating about morality and cause and effect and now and not now. And then a little while later, he tries to rape Vea, his boobs out hostess.
Well, you have no sense of now and not now when you're drunk.
That's true.
But then after, he's like, I don't feel bad.
Right.
Like it tells us he doesn't feel bad about it.
I have a lot of thoughts about that.
he's like, I'm sorry I was drunk.
I mean, and
Well,
it's
that's in the past.
and I like how she says like he feels guilty for a while and he doesn't realize that part of that feeling is a physiological effect of a hangover, which is in fact true.
That is accurate.
Yeah.
But then once the hangover wears off, he's like, I'm fine. And the book just kind of
Nothing
discards.
happened here.
The book kind of just discards the situation and the character.
It's hard to talk about that incident without getting into my misogynist moment.
I know. I'm
Okay,
getting ahead of us.
But
I'm getting
maybe we
ahead of
should
us.
take a detour.
But I also
it's so important.
But I did want. Oh man, what did I want to ask, Red? I thought about it a second ago.
There was one other thing I wanted to mention
Yes,
about
yeah,
it as well.
good,
Sorry.
yes.
I have
right in.
my notes here, but they're very disorganized.
Welcome to the club, hun.
So I thought a lot about urbanism with this book, because I think there's like a lot to say like with urbanism and utopias and dystopias in general. You know, like I grew up with cyberpunk, and even though cyberpunk was almost always like a kind of capitalist dystopia, I just still loved it. You know, I was really drawn to these dark cities with the neon, and being a queer person as well, of course, you know, it's cities really mean something to you. You know, they're spaces of freedom. And when I lived in a lot of smaller places and you'd sort of dream of going to the city. And a real issue, I think, often with like left-wing fiction is it's often quite anti-urban. And it like goes way back to, I remember the Communist Manifesto, I read that in college. And one bit that no one ever talks about is where it mentions that urban centres are where inequality is generated. And so it calls for kind of like an endless suburb. And Inaris, and Inaris reminds me a bit of that. You know, of course, there's like the capital, but no building is over one story. There's just something about it that, and this is really my issue with the society, there's something about it that I really react against. It feels like a suburb you can never escape.
Oh my God, I never thought about that. That's so good.
It feels like it's just a strode. And so that's something and that's really common, like I mentioned Woman Age of Time in that, there's been a world war and everyone lives in villages.
Yeah.
And it's really rare to find descriptions of idealized societies that are actually in cities. And that was something I really thought about with this, because when Shevek first gets to Uras, it immediately gives like a quote on urbanism, and it sounds quite negative. And of course, it's not throughout the whole book. It's got like different perspectives on urbanism that kind of explore it from different angles. But I really wanted to quote it because I thought it was really interesting. The towers of the city went up into mist, great ladders of blurred light. Trains passed overhead, bright shrieking streaks. Massive walls of stone and glass fronted the streets above the race of cars and trolleys. Stone, steel, glass, electric light. No faces. And I think that's really fascinating.
That's very Blade Runner-y, yeah.
You read that really well.
Yeah, I thought the same.
That was,
I was like,
gripped.
oh, that was beautiful.
Can you I'm going to need you to come read all of our passages that we read. But he does have this, or Ursula writes this point where Shevek goes to not Anaris.
Uras.
The city, Ebene, or whatever it's called.
Ebene, on Anaris, yeah.
And he's walking through it for the first time, and he's experiencing a city for the first time, and he has kind of a similar reaction to it. Like he sort of loves how big it is and how it has all this variety, and he's never seen a park before, and he gets passed by the omnibus and he feels like cheering and like all this stuff. So to him, that is a city with a lot of freedom and a lot of promise and a lot to offer. And I think the longer he stays there, just like most of us, the longer we stay in any place, it becomes you start to see the flaws and it becomes very commonplace, right? But it's interesting. I think she did try for an urban ideal there. But, sustainably speaking and ecologically speaking, cities are terrible. Like regionalism is really the only way you can maintain any kind of sustainable populace, because otherwise you're pulling resources from everywhere else to feed your city. It's like this big black hole of resources. And so I wonder if that's why, and like as these books sort of sprung out of the ecological movement in the 60s and 70s, if that's why cities became this big gross thing, because like ecologically they're terrible.
I didn't know that cities were ecologically terrible, because it seems like a more efficient use of space with high density housing and
That's true.
pooling of resources. I mean, I don't know anything about
if
this.
Everybody was there, that might make sense. But when you,
I think it also depends on what a city is, because like cities in North America can vary to in Europe, for example. So in North America, you have like a very, very concentrated core where you have all these skyscrapers, that are generally offices, and then it sort of goes very quickly into low density. And in Europe, there's very, very commonly sort of like 5-story buildings. Like I'm looking out my window now, and it's like 5-6-story buildings everywhere.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Like not too tall, not too small. So the shape of it can also make a huge difference. But yeah, you can actually save a lot of energy and resources by having people live in cities. It's difficult. I mean, you think about things like travel, garbage collection, power generation, applying water to low density places that can use a lot. Again, there's a lot of asterisks
really good
to
point.
this.
Maybe
that can use a lot more resources.
Maybe I should amend it to say American cities are terrible.
It's almost like there are pros and cons to everything.
Oh, weird. What I keep thinking of is the LA aqueduct, because like pulling in water from all around LA, and I mean, they dried up lakes. There were communities around these lakes that don't work anymore. They had to leave. Because, I mean, I think about things like that. I think when I say that,
Americans are especially bad at cities. So
well,
I mean, I love American cities. This is really going on a tangent. But from like
we do that.
the early 1900s, I think there's really beautiful cities. And like when you see pictures before, like sort of they get plowed through with urban freeways and things like that, I think, anyway. Yeah. I love thinking about cities. I love it a lot.
I do too, actually. I wrote a paper in law school about interstates and land use and city life. Ooh. I mean, it's a fascinating idea, because I do think it makes a lot of sense for people to flock together, especially to places that are intentionally put on some sort of navigable waterway or somewhere with a lot of resources. I mean, it makes a lot of sense why we have cities, but it also, there's a lot there it can be negative, I guess. Yeah, there's good and bad at both things.
Good and bad at both things.
This reminds me, Friday night I saw Megalopolis, which is the new Francis Ford Coppola movie.
So
it's good. And like it talks a lot about building the perfect city. And like there's a quote in it that I forget who said it, but it's like civilizations are the downfall of man, because when we get together in cities, it can be bad. I mean, the heights of humanity are great too, but so are the lows. And you've got fascism, and when people get together, it can be really bad. But yeah.
And when you add capitalism to the mix, like you get the city he goes to on Eurus, which on some level is beautiful and has amazing technology, and it's doing all these things. And some of the places, and it's obviously a beautiful place, but then you have this whole subculture of people who do not have enough, and they're not being taken care of, and yeah, it's a lot.
Our society would do it too. Like you just walk by people that are unhoused, that are starving, and
oh man,
our society
the
left it
city
happen.
and the city.
Yeah.
She had that line. Oh, the unseeing, please. She had that line about how the oh god, I'm gonna get this wrong, but she had this line about how evil's like handmaiden or something like that is the averted eye.
Oh
or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And like then he talks about people, or Shivek sees people walking by, people on the street who are unhoused,
Obviously
and,
in distress.
Yeah. And they just don't. There's no principle of mutual aid.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think at the same time, there's some elements that I think it's all completely true, and I think that's what's fascinating about cities, but like I mentioned, for queer people, but also people of color and immigrant populations, cities are very, very important places. And I think that's, I really love The Dispossessed. I really don't understand. But because I love it, I wind up thinking about what might be missing and I think on Uras, the kind of like cities as places where migrants can come, where urban communities can form among people who are otherwise marginalized, because they allow organization. That's why they allow both good and evil to them, right? And we didn't really see migrant population so much in Uras, and we only really see the city in detail really briefly when it's like the undercity and it's very poor. And I loved it, so atmospheric. I really loved it. So yeah, I don't really have like a major point with it beyond the fact I love cities. That's why in Proud Pink Sky I made this like huge cyberpunk metropolis. But I constantly thought about it in the book because I really feel like Le Guin was thinking a lot about cities and urban environments through writing this. So it's such a fascinating subject, and it ties so strongly to utopia and dystopia.
I don't think anybody has. I mean, she spent a whole book talking about two different ways people come together and which one was better, and she didn't come to a conclusion, I don't think.
Yeah, one of the long reviews I read was like, I'm not sure what her point is.
I don't know.
Well, I don't think she was trying to make a particular. I don't think she was trying to say one is better than the other.
It's an
I think
exploration.
Yeah.
It's a sandbox to play with some interesting ideas, and like she was really interested in. I think her parents were anthropologists, so like she's always been interested in like people and humans and how we deal in different situations.
Did you read in Wikipedia? I feel bad that I only read Wikipedia. I didn't do any of the research, but it was a good Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's really.
I only looked inside my brain. So
It said that her parents were friends with Oppenheimer, and that Shevek is loosely based on
I read
Oppenheimer.
that before.
Yeah, that was really
Wow.
cool.
I was like,
That's fascinating. I didn't know about the Oppenheimer connection to
I would
Shevek.
never have thought about it.
Oh my gosh.
It makes sense, yeah. Well, and also this book is like it's also reflecting the Vietnam War, which is a war that we probably know less about than other wars.
And it's also reflecting the Russian Revolution, I think. Like, if communism had gone the way everybody thought it would, like, the idealist thought it could go, like, how it would look, I think, was part of what she was doing there.
I had to Google the difference between anarchism and communism because this seems more like communism.
They mesh it up.
Yeah.
They mush it up, I think, in this.
Because there's definitely,
There's rules.
I was a little confused. Is it sort of central authority computers that are, because it isn't like the computer telling you where you're going to go work and get posted to.
Well, it's keeping track of who needs what where.
Okay.
So that when you go and say you want, I think in theory, when you go say, I want to be posted somewhere, it can say, you can go here, but there was a sort of a conscription situation during the famine.
Yeah.
So it turned more into, you're needed here, you need to go here.
Yeah.
And in theory, they could refuse, but obviously no one.
So, like, there are railroads, and I found myself wondering, when we need a railroad, who's in charge of organizing? I mean, I don't even have a frame of reference for thinking about it without the phrase "in charge." How do they organize building the railroad?
So they talked about syndicates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's syndicates in this community, and they sort of have specializations, it seems like to me. So like, there's a train syndicate.
It's like a student council, kind of like we're on the famine syndicate, and we got to figure things out, or we're on the trash.
Well, there's also this PDC, which was the source of a lot of consternation.
I could not remember what PDC was, and I meant to go back and look it up, and I didn't.
Maybe Red Nose.
Yeah.
I just remembered it as the government. I couldn't remember what it stood for.
Right. Like
something committee.
The People's Democratic Committee or something.
It definitely doesn't seem like what I thought anarchy was. I mean, there's a lot of organization. There's a lot of structure.
Well, he talks about it at the end. It's like, it's only anarchist in the sense that Odo was basically saying every individual should do what they want, right? So which is anarchy, right? You should not be beholden to any particular state or authority. But the problem is, once you create a society of people, the will of the people can kind of become a governing force.
Yeah, and it becomes, why do you want what you want?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you actually want that? Or is it
Right.
what you sort of... They say they don't feel guilt or shame, but they certainly do.
That's
They
right.
certainly do.
Which is like what the endless college thoughts are about. Like,
Yeah.
why do I feel like this when I'm being told I don't feel like this?
Yeah, like poor Shevek is like, I'd really like to live with my partner and our baby.
Sorry.
But I
That's
guess...
selfish.
Yeah. I know, how terrible.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be hard to have a society where you don't own things, but also like keeping a partner separate, because like that's almost like co-opting the person. Like,
Yeah.
And even the little girl's like, I don't want to go sleep in the creche. And that's okay. Like humans are designed to like nurse their babies and like keep their babies close. Like it's got to be hard for some mothers especially to be like, just go.
Not that one mother.
Yeah. Some mothers might like it. Well, that's just that every person is different. Like some people may love that idea and some people would hate it. So
Reading it this time, it was like really, I really like at points in the book, I really wasn't sure. Like, I mean, it feels like a thought experiment, and it's like, you know, Anaris it feels real, and I think that that's where like she has this incredible talent. But I found Anaris. There were points where I was like, is Anaris really better than Uras? You know, it's
No.
or than AAO, because of course on Uras there's all these different governments. I think for me that the sort of groupthink and this real tangible, you know, this real sense of oppression that Shevek and his friends experience really feels like constricting, but there's nothing to fight against.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yes.
what really
Oh,
felt
yeah.
yeah.
ambitopian.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, in AIO, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but on Earth, you can fight the government, you can come together. But yeah, on Anaris, it's like, who do you fight? It's like, it's intangible, it's everywhere. And that really felt sort of threatening this time reading it.
And they keep saying that too. They're like, there's no one to get mad at. There's no, the society is the person and the person is the society. There's no one you can, because he gets so angry when his partner, what's her name?
Takver?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Takver, yeah. When she goes off to the spit of land where she's going to hatch shrimp or whatever she's doing. Like he gets so mad, but there's no one to be mad about.
Yeah.
And all he can do is go
Just
like,
feelings, yeah.
like evict himself to the mines or whatever it is.
And that is so hard to have a misdirected emotion like that. You're just mad and you're just like, well, what do I do with this?
It's like on Family Ties when the liberal family and then the son is Republican to like rail against them. Because sometimes that's all you got.
That's all you got.
Yeah.
It's interesting how many dichotomies she sets up and give, you know, like I love the sandbox metaphor that you just said, Haley, where you have things to think about, because on the one hand, they talk about relationships as proprietarian, but I really liked this scene kind of early in the book when Shevek is a terribly bratty young adult, which is, I think, another reason I stepped away from this. I was like, I do not want to spend time with this guy.
I identified with that guy.
And then
He's a special boy and he's different.
he's very well, actually.
Yeah, he's insufferable.
So he wants to hook up with this young woman he's met, Gemar. And she's like, oh, I have a partner. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? As though there would be no reason for him to just want to chat with her, hang out with her if they couldn't go hook up in the forest.
Yeah.
And he says, life partnership is really against the Odonian ethic, I think. And then I appreciate that the narrator says, he said, harsh and pedantic. Yes. I appreciate that about the book, is that when he's being awful, the book is like, he's being awful.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that. But she goes on to say, having's wrong, sharing's right. What more can you share than your whole self, your whole life, all the nights and all the days? And I loved that. And then, of course, he goes, I'm not up for that. And that was another one of the times I laughed out loud.
He was just mad.
He was just mad. Yeah, he wanted to hook up. He didn't get to, and so then it was her fault for not saying she had a partner. But yeah, this book is very serious, and so then the times that I would laugh out loud like that, it was just such a surprise. So I think it was nice that she peppered these little moments of how people are just kind of ridiculous in there.
Let's think about what you just said about dichotomies and how she sets up one thing against the other.
Yeah, I mean that's what the whole book is doing.
It's fascinating because I kept thinking of Takver versus Via. That was the one thing that kept popping into my mind, is like Takver's approach to her interaction with Shevek. I guess that's the only one we really see her interact with, and Via's, and how Via is like nothing but sexual manipulation, basically, which makes sense in her time and place.
What else does she have?
Right.
Yeah.
And Takver's is nothing but, here is what I am, take it or leave it.
I am a practical, grounded notary public.
and neither neither and both are good. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it was. I had a lot of thoughts about Via.
I mean,
in
Tech
particular.
first
I
seems
really
like
liked her.
Yeah.
I did too,
I thought-
to a
yeah.
point.
you liked Vea.
To a point. Yeah.
Do you know what's funny? Like, so many times, communist or like anarcho things, it's got to be so dreary. Like, there's one point where he's like, "Why don't you paint that thing olive drab? Like, why can't there be beauty?" On
I
this
have
planet?
that quote. I have that quote. That was another one of the things that made me laugh out loud.
Yeah, like-
it was about the orange blanket.
Yep.
Let's see. Let me find it. Oh,
Like-
okay. So his friend Bedap is like, "Oh my god, this orange blanket. What are you doing?" And then he goes on to say, "Oh, and Shevik's like, it's handmade. It's cozy. I like it."
fine.
I didn't buy it.
It's the
Bedap
blanket that I
says,
use.
"It's the blanket that I use. Yeah, it's definitely an excremental color. As a functions analyst, I must point out that there is no need for orange. Orange serves no vital function in the social organism. In which case, tolerance is a less good choice than excretion. Diet dirty green, brother."
like a robot wrote that.
Well, it was so funny to me. And then the idea of like investing the time and energy and dye into changing the color of it is also a useless thing to do.
Yeah.
It's orange, just let it be orange.
I have a feeling.
But it makes you wonder what art is really like on Anaris, because we see bits
yeah.
of it.
Talk about,
you know.
yeah, let's talk about art.
Yeah.
Shall we
So-
talk about art? Well, I think, and this goes, I think, to what you were saying earlier, Red, about like cities being sort of meccas to people who have a contrary or creative spirit. You know what I mean? Like, there are artists in this community, and they talk about like
They play music.
Tyrion.
Oh, yeah, the playwright.
Poor Tyrion, who
Yeah.
had this genius in him that he did not know what to do with, because the artistic genius is sort of, it's meant to disrupt. It's meant to make people think. It's meant to interpret the world around you in a different way. And he has nothing. He can't do anything with that, because the reaction to his art is ostracization, essentially. But art does pop up. Like they talk about the artisan jewelers that live in the small towns. I forgot her name again.
So sometimes they can wear two rings. Like,
Takver?
Takver has her whirling,
Her mobile things.
her mobile
Yeah.
things, the taking up uninhabited space or
And
whatever.
This is where this book made me think about Station 11.
yeah, survival.
Only theater was ever called
Yes.
the art, a
Yeah.
thing
Yes.
complete in itself. There were many regional and traveling troupes of actors and dancers, repertory companies, very often with a playwright attached. They were as welcome as rain in the lonely desert towns.
But you got to wonder what they're performing, right? Like if you can't have subversive art, then what are they performing?
Marvel movies.
And
I mean, there's
sexless superhero action.
there's plenty of entertainment that's not like thought provoking. I like a lot of garbage.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. No, you know that I will watch Housewives
Exactly,
any day, all day. Although Housewives, I wonder if it would
It's a
be
critique.
welcome in Anaris, because
Oh,
it's
no.
a critique, right? It is. It's a weird
I mean, imagine the
satirical-
reality TV on Anaris.
They're like, oh, I got some Harlem scrub.
Where's their
Chop
TV?
chef.
Life in the salt mine.
Well, you can't sit around and do nothing is the problem. You can't be sitting on your butt watching TV, because you got to be productive.
you also can't sit on your butt and do your physics.
Yeah.
Apparently.
You have to hide in your one room that you can't have in
Yeah.
order to do your
And
physics.
then everyone's mad at you.
You know, sometimes
But you
his,
also can't. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, just you can't. One note I had down is you can't be like really introverted either.
Oh, no.
Oh God, I would hate everything about Anaris, by the way.
It's like for me, there was another thing I found really uncomfortable. Let's have a look through my notes. I'm having extrovert culture. It's like solitude is equated with disgrace. That's the
Yeah,
quote I had.
awful.
And it's like, oh my god, like you have to be around people all the time, and
Sometimes
you
I
have
just
to
wanna go
be in
home.
dorms.
Yeah, Shevik just needed a room of one's own.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
book is also Virginia Woolf. This book is everything.
The idea that you have to live in communal environments unless you are partnered up, and then you have to live with that person, it sounds like my personal hell. And I know that
Yeah.
if maybe my personal Eurus, since hell is not a thing that exists.
Well, if you think about it, we're probably the first generation, at least in our families, of women who can live alone. Like through all of human history, every woman in my genetic line probably was married to a man and had kids.
My mother couldn't be alone.
Exactly.
I mean,
my mother
not
did.
alone ever.
Yeah.
Not one time.
So my grandmother was widowed in 2022, and she was telling me about how she had never lived alone. And she had lived alone briefly. She got divorced from my biological grandfather, and she was talking about I had never been alone, and she was in her 50s,
wow.
I think, at the time. And she said she had always shared a bedroom because she had a lot of siblings, and so growing up, she shared a bedroom. She got married to my biological grandfather at 17.
Wow.
And her parents had to sign. I teased her. I said, "Did Granny and Grandpa have to sign a permission slip for you to get married?" And she said, "Yes."
Wow.
So she got married at 17.
Was she still in high school?
Wow.
Did she graduate?
That
High
is a
school
good
was a
question.
fluid concept back
That,
then.
I actually have never asked her that, and that's a good question because she has a late in the year birthday, so maybe she had graduated high school by then. I hope so.
17.
And then when she got divorced, and she found herself in a house by herself for the first time in her life in her 50s. So yeah, the idea of not even having the option of living alone is not in the recent past for many people.
My mother was widowed in 2022. That was the first time she had ever lived alone. She was in her late 70s.
Wow.
So this is the first time she's lived alone. She's living alone now. This is the first time she's ever lived alone. It is fascinating watching her learn to deal with this, right?
And enjoy a room of her own.
She does it for
Not enjoy. I shouldn't say necessarily, but to explore a room of her own.
enjoyment. I don't think came into it for a while.
Of course,
she didn't quite know what to do. Like she wouldn't turn the TV on. Like she didn't know what she wanted to do. Like she had to figure out at any given moment what she would choose to do because she had literally never been presented with a situation where she could just choose to do what she wanted to do.
That's wild.
Which was a wild thing to watch. And it took everything in me not to be like, here's what you should do.
I'm sad that she lost her husband, but like, I'm glad she gets a little taste of this, though.
Yeah. I mean, same. I you know.
Should we edit this out? Will it hurt her feelings?
No. Oh, she doesn't listen.
Oh, okay, good.
She doesn't want to talk about Odonianism?
As my father said at one point there was too much giggling, and that was the last time they ever listened to it.
You never know. She might be like, oh, I have all this time on my hands. Maybe I'll listen to this podcast.
Well, she spends a lot of time watching Graham Norton edits on YouTube.
Aw.
Okay.
And playing solitaire on her phone. And then sometimes she turns on the television to watch the Netflix.
Yeah.
And tennis.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
She putters around the garden. You know.
It's Anne's world now.
It's Anne's world now.
We're just living it. All right. Are we good on time? Should we go to the categories?
Yeah, we should probably move on to our...
Oh, no, I have so much more to say.
Oh.
It's fine.
One more topic.
Red, anything you wanted to add, Red?
There was one last thing that it reminded me of. So when I first moved to Berlin, I was in and around a lot of anarchist communities.
Oh.
And this book makes me think about that time. I also read this book around that time. And what was interesting was I made this U-Bahn map, this subway map of Berlin, this joke one that went viral. And one of the stops I had was anarchist totalitarianism. And the reason that I had that was because I had had so much policing from people in anarchist communities, and not about anything directly political, but about visual things like how I dress. I mean, you can probably see I like to dress very colorfully, like a mad butterfly. But no, for real, like, and I like button-down shirts. I don't have much money, I never have, but I buy things from thrift stores, blah, blah, blah. But I would get a lot of hostility from people who I knew and who I didn't, who would police the way I dressed. And so that was something that really, really resonates with me from this book, was I felt really unwelcome in a lot of anarchist spaces because I didn't dress or look like or talk like how I was expected to. And to the point that for a friend's birthday party, I went wearing this old suit and he was furious with me. I just was like, I'm in class drag.
It's like powder blue.
Were you too orange?
Yeah, so it made me think about that. You know, it's like there's really there are ways of controlling people and there are ways of oppressing and marginalizing people that don't involve power structures as we think of them. And I really love that Le Guin explores that.
Yeah.
Right. It's that social pressure, right? It's like every subculture I feel like comes with this. Yeah. And even if people don't feel like they're gatekeeping. They're like there's a way you have to be, there's some things you have to accept in order to be a part of this. And I think it's protectiveness of themselves, especially if you find your people, right? You want to make sure that those people aren't infiltrated by somebody who doesn't get them, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. So I'm curious, like, was it like, did they see it as too frivolous? Did they see it as too, as not taking it seriously? Or what was their, do you know what their reaction was? Do you know where it was coming from?
I mean, it varied from buzz, and it wasn't like I don't mean to overstate it. It wasn't like everywhere all the
universal.
time. Rocks thrown at me, but you know, I think I
not
got
all
associated.
anarchists got you.
So I lived in Kreuzberg, which had a heavy anarchist and alternative presence. I mean, it's changed since because of gentrification, blah blah blah. But I would get, I'd wear waistcoats and stuff that I bought secondhand for nothing. But I would get stuff yelled at me for being rich. Sort of tourists go home, and that attitude persisted in, from people who were sort of, I'm also very, to the left in my own ways. I'm rambling right now. It's like,
No,
It's fine.
okay.
That's what this show is
We
about.
ramble literally the whole time, all the time.
Yeah, but it was, and it was, it's not like what I've had from like the far right or anything.
Yeah.
But it was very, very unwelcoming. And there's certainly an element of conformity that can exist to any community that forms. And so I think that that's what this does really, really well. And
Yeah.
I think the fact that Ursula Guin explores this society from the perspective of Shevek, from Bedap, from Takva, who are all non-conformists in this society. I really think that she could imagine herself, or has experienced that probably from different communities, that kind of ostracism.
Well, she was a woman who never wanted to get married. She was partnered for a long time and then opted not to get married. She was living this, I think, for the time, subversive existence, which I imagine she got quite a bit of. But people love to tell women that they should get married and have kids.
Yeah.
So I feel like she probably got that a lot.
Your experience, Fred, reminds me of my experience in high school with punk kids. So I've always liked punk music, but in Savannah, Georgia in the 90s, like I was not cool. I've always had blonde hair and blue eyes and kind of worn just t-shirts. And so like they were just as much the mean girls as like the cheerleaders. Yeah. They just wore black. And I'm in between the two. And I'm just like, why are y'all so mean? I thought punk people were supposed to be nice. And a lot of times they're just as mean as the mean girls.
Who told you punk people were nice?
Well, they seem like they're counterculture. They're like anti-jock, and those people aren't nice to me either. So I'm just like, why are you both mean to me?
My picture of punk people in my head is definitely a spiky hair, oi, oi, oi type that will punch you right in the face. If you
So this conversation makes me think of a panel that I went to at Dragon Con. Kevin and I went to a Dragon Con about punk sci-fi movies, and I took down the list of movies that they talked about, and we've been slowly working our way through them. And Kevin, is it Return of the Living Dead? Okay, so one of the panelists was talking about the movie Return of the Living Dead, and he was talking about how it has every kind of punk represented in it, which is very funny to think about. And I hadn't thought about it when I was watching it, but I was like, yeah, they do have like the chains and the spiked Mohawk kid. And they also have the kid in like regular clothes who's got a kind of a regular job at the Split Dog Factory. If you have not seen that movie, it is very funny and fun. And then they have the punk kid who wears the 3-piece suit.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, there is like every type of punk kid represented in that movie. So it was just a fun observation and a fun thing to think about. And I've actually, oddly enough, just thought really often about the kind of punk in the 3-piece suit fairly often since that panel.
They became the Cherry Poppin' Daddies or something at some point, didn't they?
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Like that
Is that a band?
Yeah,
for the 90s,
there was like
Zoot Suit Riot.
Yeah, the Zoot Suit Riot. Like
Oh, okay.
90s.
Yeah. Okay.
One of my favorite memes is it's a picture of like a nerdy guy with glasses and like a button-up shirt, and it's like, if this guy's your guitarist, you're about to die in that pit because like he's that good. He's so punk that he looks like a dad.
So punk, he went and he did a full 180.
Yeah, it's like
Punk can be anything, y'all.
Yeah.
and
It's a state of mind, baby.
Punk. This is a good transition to feminism. Is very performative in some sense. Same with anarchists. I bet they got their battle vests or whatever, but maybe they're just put on a show. So feminist favorite. I'll go first. Honestly, you go, Via. Shevek describes her as the body profiteer to end them all. That means that she's like the top of her game. She's like the housewife to end housewives.
I mean, she does have it. I mean, she has a husband she never sees.
Oh yeah, he's away on business.
She's very clearly like never paying for anything.
I love that. Oh yes, here's the check.
That was so funny. She just sits there. She's like, no, that's a you problem.
Maybe you should write a check.
And he's like, all I have is $10.
Yeah, I liked her. I liked her in a lot of ways. I also felt sorry for her in a lot of ways, which was weird.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a society that's very much like 1950s America. Like women are just there to hang out.
She is owning every bit of power that she can.
Yeah, she's operating in the paradigm of her life.
In the situation that she's given.
I took screenshots of the pages where they're talking about women's power in the society, and he's talking about how the men run everything, and then she starts talking about how the women run the men, and that was exactly right. It's such a 1950s way of looking at their role in the world.
It's like a nice way of being like, I've got a little bit of power, but honey, you can't vote. Like,
right? It's like it's such a sad concept of power, but at the same time, maybe it's true. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Red, any thoughts on Vea?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Fair. I think because she's so you get a real sense of like her intelligence and her shrewdness in the book, but like how her intellect is shaped by the confines in which she finds herself. And she really, really tries to wield power in the ways that she can. And she doesn't just say it, you see it, in these social situations.
True.
She's really trying to make the best of her position. And she's not resentful about it because she doesn't seem to see an alternative. It's very much been naturalized in the society, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of feminist movement on Uras, at least not that we really see.
Yeah.
And I really liked her. That's why I know we're going to talk about it. When Shevek assaults her and then she disappears, that really, really felt. I mean, I had a lot of thoughts about that and like what that meant. But I think in a way, you could see it as the ultimate critique of this position, that she can never really afford real power because, we see her being kind of self-actualized in a very limited way, but then she's assaulted and disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really think it shows the limits of what women in this society can achieve. Having said that, the person who assaults her is from a different society.
That's
it's
true.
from Anaris.
In a society
and what does
where
that say about Anaris?
rape and sexual assault are stigmatized. Your neighbors might kill you before you go to the therapy dungeon.
Right.
So
This is another interesting thing. Sorry, I'm just on that point. I made a note as well because when it says about rape and sexual assault on Anaris, it says against women and children.
Mm-hmm.
And
I noticed that too.
was a really interesting thing
Yeah.
because it's like,
Clearly it
also,
still happens. So, or else they wouldn't.
Yes.
Well, and also specified against women and children only, as if either
men
it
can't
happen to men. Is that what that implies, or is it that maybe if it happens, it's not talked about? Or I mean, what does that mean?
Or I wonder if it's on
but they have
purpose.
same-sex relationships in it,
Or it's that idea that you can't, like how you couldn't rape a wife for a long time.
Yeah,
You can't rape a man. It's not rape if it happens to a man or something.
Yeah, I definitely stopped at that. I think maybe 30 years ago, maybe they just wouldn't have thought about that because people didn't talk about that kind of thing. But yeah.
Or it's not the same kind of power disimbalance. Maybe they don't, or she didn't see it that way. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that was a deliberate choice or if that was just the natural thing that she wrote because in her own mind, that's just not something that's an option.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what that exclusion means.
I definitely noticed that. I was like, whoa.
We'd have to ask her and we can.
Like it should just be don't rape anyone.
Right.
Rape bad.
Bad in
Rape
general.
bad. Just don't.
If a person is raped, your neighbors might drag you out and beat you to death.
Well, and that's another distinction is like the neighbors would think that it's just like a morality overstep, whereas I think on Uras, it's like in America, it's like, oh, that's my property that you've defiled.
Well, he talks about how she becomes, like these women have become so sexualized that they have stopped being
Oh, yeah, that's my
human
quote
beings.
from Misogynist Moment.
Oh, yeah. Mine too.
She was so elaborately and ostentatiously a female body that she seemed scarcely to be a human
Which I
being.
think is how he starts to see her when he gets drunk and she's there and she doesn't have any clothes on. And
so I mean, that justifies, that's how sexual assault can happen. Like when you dehumanize somebody, it's much easier to take advantage of them.
So once he thought that, it was in that fertile medium of his brain.
But also,
as they say,
so misogynist. Like, let a woman be a woman however they want to be a woman.
Well, even Takver, that's what I was going to say. Takver has this very judgy stance on this because obviously this kind of thing happens in some way on Anaris because Takver, who's never been to Eurus, says she's the one that coins that term body profiteer.
Yeah.
And she says that's what she calls women who use their sexuality as a weapon in a power struggle with men.
And it did make me wonder what the context for that was. What is she seeing taking place on Anaris that we haven't seen that gives her even the ability to think about other women that way?
Well, and
I was disappointed in her.
Yeah, and that statement doesn't even talk about like wearing eyeshadow. Because you could take advantage of a man wearing a burlap sack sometimes. Like,
well, these women, as we learned from Via, to her horror, don't shave anything ever.
So I want to. That was in my laugh out loud section, which I would like to mention since we're talking about Via, even though we've kind of gone off track.
So joyless.
It was so funny. Thea asks if Anaresti women only shave once a month, and she's like, "Oh no, I bet they only shave once a month." And Shevek says, "Well, they don't shave at all," and she says, "Never? Not anywhere? Oh Lord, let's talk about something else." I put the book down and I laughed for like 20 seconds. I'm like, this book is.
But also, I remember being like a 17-year-old, whatever, who had never been anywhere ever. Or no, it must have been younger than that, but maybe not that much younger. And learning that French women didn't shave their armpits.
Did you learn that from Home Alone?
Yeah.
Maybe, possibly. I don't know. I remember all of us being like,
It was definitely like
But-
a passed along meme in the 90s, like French women don't shave their pits.
Oh man, I have the same horror. I felt Via in that moment.
So funny.
The way
But
that
also,
go
they
ahead.
have hair all over them, right? So, like, shaving must be like a really time-consuming process because they'd have to
swimmer.
like shave their foreheads, like.
Well, that's what these women on Eurus are doing. They're very clearly shaving their entire head,
Yeah.
and God knows what else. I mean, but that's what women mammals do. You know, we have to depilate a lot.
And I think about that as like a extreme representation of what people do. Many women do now because of, expectations and beauty standards. And the thing that I always think about it in the context of is when I was in law school and I was getting ready for interviews, they'll a bunch of like law firms and employers will come to campus and you can do a bunch of job interviews in one day. And I remember when I was getting ready for the interviews and I was straightening my hair, and my hair was quite long at the time, and it took so long. I mean, it took like 2 hours to wash it, dry it, straighten all of it. And I remember thinking, people who aren't doing this have a lot of more time to prepare for their interviews. And I just think about it a lot, how much time and money and effort and energy is sunk into that. And so in this society in particular, if you are expected to remove every last hair from your body, you don't have time to do
what are you
much
doing?
else.
You're spending 8 hours shaving your body,
And I
then
do
4
wonder-
hours
I guess
using
they're
it
not,
to seduce
I guess
men.
they're not working.
No, well, right.
Yeah.
But like part of it is like, well, who has the time? I mean, do you have time to do anything else if you're doing all that? And I wonder, I don't think that did we get physical descriptions when he was in the the poor neighborhood? I wonder, did the people there have hair? Because they're working all the time. They don't have time to shave out
a good
every
question.
last little hair. I wonder if it's a class thing.
Yeah, I picture these people kind of like in the Hunger Games capital. They're just like,
Oh, yeah.
grotesque.
I thought about that too. Because they're walking around with like magnets under their skin to hold jewels on, and the women have their tits all out all the time.
The boobs out thing is so funny to
I
me.
got so many
and I
things
mean,
to say
I
about
know
that.
it's just like the thing is, as I've said many times on the show about books that talk about boobs, and like you don't talk about an elbow like that. You don't tell us what every character's elbow looks like, and it's just another body part. So it's sort of funny that in this book, in some ways, breasts are treated like just any other body part on Urus because they're just out and visible. And it was just funny to think about.
Yeah.
Well, but not walking down the street though, but like at home or at your
tits
dinner
out.
party.
Well, it's
I have a
out.
question for everyone, actually, about Oras. Do you think that Oras was always like this, or do you think that this is some sort of like neo kind of reactionary position for women? Because like Odo became a major influential philosopher.
Oh, that's such a good
And-
question. I did wonder about that.
That might be late
Are
stage
you a
capitalism.
genius? Maybe you're a genius. I never thought about that.
I thought about it briefly and I promptly forgot. So thank you for.
Well, there's this whole
Because it's so extreme.
Right.
It's so extreme.
and there's
And
this
it's like,
whole undercurrent about sorry, I'm so sorry.
no, please.
There's this whole undercurrent about how dangerous Anaris is, right? And like, how influential must they have been for a powerful government with weapons to buy them off by giving them a planet and then agree never to go there, right?
Yeah.
You stay there, we stay here, never the twain shall meet. They must have been so powerful that they were so scared.
Yeah.
And so it makes total sense what you just said. I got chill bumps when you said that. It makes total sense because obviously it's still sticking around and they're terrified. So women have absorbed this.
It also might be like how in America we're still like people call Kamala a communist. Like she's not.
We're terrified of
She's
communism.
3 steps to the left.
Capitalists hate communists.
Like even if they're not super afraid of what, because I don't think Anaris could be like a scary foe, but just the idea of upsetting like their hegemony over like their capitalist.
And they must have been on the brink.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah, that's true.
they wouldn't have done what they did.
Yeah.
Give them the moon. I mean,
And that's why
it's-
But also nobody wants that.
the Terran ambassador is like, I thought this was just a quaint experience, but maybe this is the key to the whole planet.
Yeah.
And I think so you saying that just made me think about a lot in this book a different way. Having a galaxy brain moment.
Do you need a second?
I'm okay.
Are you like mind
I do want to know what Red was going to say that I cut off. Do you remember?
No, just when I was reading it, because it's so interesting that a lot of it feels very grounded, and you get this feeling that like Io is like a kind of America / Western Europe, and then Du is like kind of Russia or China with a communist revolution that's very statist, and a lot of it's really grounded. But then you've got this like, in some ways really Victorian, in some ways really, I mean, the fact that it's conventional for women to have bare breasts, like really objectifying and sexualized. And it's so extreme compared to a lot of the stuff in the novel that's so grounded. And I just spent a lot of time thinking, like, what are the reasons for that? Like, what happened with this? And like, because it doesn't feel like there's been I don't think it's been like that forever, because there's been progress in these societies.
Yeah, they talk about
how
that,
the societies have changed. They've had like an environmental movement it mentions after they really screwed the planet up that sort of helped things a bit. It mentions like some element of welfare and social democracy, or that's inconsistent. But when it comes to feminism, it's like the worst aspect of like so many different worlds. And it doesn't feel like it's just been like that since the dawn of time and nothing changed, because of course people must think about it because Anaris exists and gender relations are different there. So it feels like a really strong reaction against something to me in the book.
I viewed the boobs as the opposite, actually. Like, like on Instagram, you can have a picture of a male nipple, but not a female nipple. But like, they're both just parts of our bodies, and the shame comes from what we put onto it. So maybe it is just like the trend of the day. It's like having a shaved head.
Were men walking around with their shirts off?
They weren't, but like...
Yeah, there weren't any male nipples at all. It was so disappointing.
A single male nipple.
Yeah, but like, it's so funny because in our society, as much cleavage as you want, just don't show the nipple. So like, is there that much of a difference? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I sort of thought too, if a person's breasts are always out,
it gets less...
Don't they become commonplace and
elbows
less sexualized? I would think. But I mean, because it isn't part of the tantalizing nature that you don't ever see the nipple.
That's true.
And so,
like the ankle.
Like Victorian ankles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like all what we choose to fetishize, and if that's off the table, and it's just like, I get free titties all the time. I don't know.
Yeah, are they exciting if you see them all the time?
I have some guy friends that'd be like, all titties all the time. But so I don't know. Maybe it would never get boring, but...
I would be fascinated if everybody started walking around with their titties all out.
I mean,
everybody stop saying titties.
I kind of want to know what everybody's looked like. I want to know. Because...
Well, and there are cultures on Earth where it's not a big deal. So, I don't know.
True.
That was a long feminist favorite.
Oh, that...
And we went to misogyny.
and boob talk.
Wait, I have a really good boob talk. I gotta get out there.
I will say that her talk of boobs is very natural and like not insane, which is good.
Except for when she calls the nipples the blind eyes.
That's what I had.
Oh,
That was another time when I put the book down and I laughed out loud.
I missed that. Damn.
I have the quote.
Yay!
It's at the oft discussed dinner party. Vea was curled up on the hassock at Shevik's knees, erect and supple, her soft breasts staring at him with their blind eyes. What? It's so good. It's so funny. It's so funny.
Who says they can't see?
Good point.
Maybe they just see different than you.
What if they need glasses?
Oh no, it winked at me.
It winked. Well, if you've had certain kinds of surgery, it could be winking at you.
I mean, some people, some might be winking anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That was weird.
All right, fantastical food.
I like that Shevik likes sweets because I also like sweets, and they have a party before Shevik leaves for Abinay, which kind of surprised me because he's kind of a turd. And so I was surprised that they had this big party for him.
I get the goodbye.
Yeah, he's kind of a charismatic guy when he engages. That's the impression I got of him.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can see him being kind of a gravitational force to people.
Kind of an Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
So maybe they're like, let's give him a big send off. Thank God he's leaving.
Yeah.
So the refectory baker, quote, let his fancy loose and produced hitherto unknown delights: spiced wafers, little peppered squares to go with the smoked fish, sweet fried cakes succulently greasy, fruit drinks, preserved fruit, tiny salt shrimp, piles of sweet potato chips. That all sounds quite good to me.
I would have been eating the crap out of those tiny salt shrimp.
It seems like they're so utilitarian that they wouldn't just have gruel because it's like cheaper and more.
But they do. I mean, they talk a lot about getting pork. I think
they do eat a lot of gruel.
And
they do. But like having sweet cakes seems very much like a treat.
I mean, you're not allowed to color orange. Why are they allowed sweet cakes?
I was surprised that sometimes things were punctuated by that. And I mean, I guess
there's part of humans.
What part of what she's showing us is like, we're going to find a way to have fun. Like in some of the towns where they're really into their jewelry, Shevik really likes sweets. If there's extra, he'll sort of hang back and see if he can take seconds.
Yeah.
So like people are going to find ways to enjoy themselves, I think, even under these kind of conditions.
One of the ones I laughed out loud at was when someone told him they didn't have fun on Anaris, and he was like, oh yeah, no fun. All we do, hang out in the mines,
dye things green.
Yeah, it was very funny.
There's that plant.
Holum.
Yeah. If nothing else, there's the scrub holum. You can gather wild holum seeds and pound them for meal. And I thought of The Force Awakens when she's like 1/4 portion of the bread.
Oh man, I thought about 1/4 portion when he was talking about the famine.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how old people got like a half ration, and kids, and sick people, but people who worked a full day got that whole ration. It was awful.
There was a part that made me think
But at
about...
the same time, sorry, he took double portions at one point during the famine.
Well, he had been
thing.
without food for 80 hours.
No. I'm not judging Shevek here. We've got enough to judge Shevek on when it comes to Vey. But like that he's like, I think there's like the guy serving or the person serving was like sort of giving
How
him the
dare
side
you,
eye.
yeah.
But like you think he'd be like screaming at him, profiteer.
Egoist.
Yeah, egoizing.
I was never 100% sure what they meant when they're like, "Are you egoizing?" I'm like, I don't know. I think the baby just said she was hungry.
Did we hear about much of the food on Eurus? I don't remember Ross.
The only thing that I made a note of was the chocolates.
Yeah.
When he goes to the candy shop.
And it was the scene from Love Actually.
Oh, that's exactly what I wrote down. Have you seen Love Actually, Red?
Yes.
It's the scene where Mr. Bean is wrapping that is exactly what I thought about, is wrapping the necklace. And then Alan Rickman goes,
ticks.
"What are you going to do next? Dip it in yogurt and cover it in chocolate buttons."
Ooh, Alan Rickman. Oh, I hate him in that movie.
That scene is so funny.
All right, soap stuff.
I had when Shevek and Takver meet and they fall in love at first sight, and they're like, "We're married now. Let's get a room."
Second sight for her, to be fair.
Second
To
sight.
be fair.
And he didn't even remember
He
her.
didn't remember her. He did remember her. She had short hair. She looked like
Actually,
me in late high school.
I liked when she was like, "I cut my hair short because I wanted to stand out
it
and
was
look
so good.
different." And I was like, that is so cute and so true to what a young person with a crush would want to do. Give themselves a cool haircut to attract a person. Just like Amy did.
Just like I did. I felt her in that moment. I had when Rulag shows up at the hospital.
Oh, that's it.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the one.
His long lost mother.
His long lost mother is his nurse at the hospital.
And she's and they have such a fascinating conversation, and then they turn into mortal enemies later, sort of. I don't know. I think there's a whole thing there.
There could be a separate book.
Yeah.
a whole separate book
Yeah.
about Rulag.
Mm-hmm.
I was into her.
Maybe she just didn't want her son to leave and go to another
Right. I think
planet.
she was coming from this maternal instinct. She insisted
She was
didn't
afraid
have.
for him.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Fascinating.
Still a mom.
Whole thing's fascinating.
Maybe she was just being a jerk.
But I did like her whole thing. Like, I didn't want to stay, and he did, and that seemed fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you mad at me? And he's like, yes. And she's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go then.
Happy.
We're just both gonna have our feelings about it.
Did you like the book?
I unreservedly liked this book. I was so happy when I finished it. I was like, man, I really liked that. I'm so glad I read it.
Yeah.
I like spending any time with Ursula Le Guin.
Yeah, I mean, I feel more complicated about it than I did 10 years ago when I read it, but in a really interesting way. There's like so much to think about, and there's so many elements that are just sort of thrown in there, and yeah, I don't know, that you could spend days just thinking about it.
I think this is one of those types of books where I feel like if you read it at different stages of your life, it's going to hit you completely differently.
For sure.
You know?
the beauty of it.
So I remember reading in college, and I think I read like half of it about 10 years ago. I didn't finish it for some reason that time. But then and every time, it feels different every time.
I have a pony prattle.
Yay!
This book has a pony prattle. This is our occasional segment where if there's a horse in the book, I get excited.
There's also penis parades. In this
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
because I was a horse girl as a child.
As a child.
As a child, yeah.
Definitely not now. Definitely
I still
not
have
now.
an inner horse girl for sure.
She didn't go swim with the ponies last year.
I didn't swim with them. I saw them swim. So when Shevek's like driving through, when he first gets to Urus, and he's driving through with some of his Urasti hosts, and he sees a horse and he doesn't know what it is because they don't have any large animals,
Yeah,
which I think is
true.
so interesting about Inara, is that there are only fish and little marine life. And he says he sees breath jetted in vapor from what must be nostrils, and terrible, unmistakable, there was an eye. A large, dark eye, mournful, perhaps cynical? What was that? Shevek asked. And then one of the people says, donkey, wasn't it? A donkey is a kind of a horse. And then another guy says, that was a horse. Donkeys don't come in that size. And then that's the end of the scene.
Yep.
It's so funny.
And they mentioned horses on Anaris at one point. Someone was talking about going to Eurus and how they'd like to see a horse.
How they'd like to see a
Yeah.
horse. Yeah.
And then that otter showed up. She was cute.
Oh, the pet otter.
The otter was cute, and I love that he wanted to take a picture of a sheep back to show to his baby daughter. I thought that was so
All the
cute.
little postcards at the
Do you
little
think that the
kiosk.
animals are like the same as the Earth animals, or do you think that these are like translations for like complete? Because when I saw the horse, I'm like, how many legs does this have?
I have a lot of
Good
thoughts
question.
about that, and since all of these planets were seeded by the Hainish, I'm assuming they were seeded with all the crap from Hain, and so they're all the same.
Yeah.
That's my theory.
But like
You're dropping all the
humans,
horses off.
humans on Gethin in left hand are not quite the same.
Yeah.
Well, are
Yeah, they evolved to be
some major
different.
physical differences. So now that it's been a couple thousand years, well, we think maybe it's been a few thousand
Did they
years.
evolve that way, or were they made that way?
I think we don't know.
We don't know.
Maybe we don't know. So who knows? Maybe a horse is 6-legged or 2-legged.
Yeah,
Maybe
this
a
is
horse
wonderful.
is standing
Scaly.
up looking at you, and that's why it's so disconcerting.
Oh, I don't like it on its hind legs. Oh.
Yeah.
Now, the next time I read this book, I'm going to read it completely differently. That's wonderful.
All the horses are BoJack horsemen. It's like, all right, is this book Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings.
Oh, explain.
Oh, I was just saying because you sounded Scottish when you said that.
Yeah.
Or Irish. I don't know which one.
I think. Okay, here are my points on both sides because I have a hard time picking. Rulog is
That's
sort of.
very dispossessed of you.
It is. Oh, I would like to say that it was Wednesday of this week that it occurred to me what the dispossessed means.
I still don't
These
know what it
people,
means.
They don't have any property.
Well, right, but they
it's a
weren't
forcible
dispossessed because they never had any property.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they voluntarily dispossessed themselves. I don't know.
Who are the
society.
dispossessed, really?
I don't know, man. who possesses the dispossessed? I don't know. Sorry. Okay, so Rulog is sort of a Vader character, but all of his journeying around is giving Lord of the Rings. But counterpoint to that, there are no second breakfasts, and many times there are no first breakfasts. Definitely no 11. Also, Inara seems like Tatooine,
That's what I had.
and a man gets his hand blown off. Oh, so I think I land on Star Wars. More
And
like
there's
Star Wars?
spaceships and technology.
Spaceships.
Trick question.
I have some counterpoints.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just sort of. So I'm going to say Lord of the Rings because I think that Anaris is, even though it doesn't look like it, is a bit like the Shire. This kind of like innocent place where all the buildings are one story.
And they have furry feet.
Yeah, they do.
Huh?
Yeah.
And they have furry feet.
Exactly, and they have furry feet. And then the main character goes and journeys into this kind of like Mordor, which
Okay,
is
yeah.
like the antithesis of what they, and is like, I don't know, I'm running out of steam with this.
Oh my God,
but there were two
that's
Nope,
things.
I'm with you so far. And then he journeys back again.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Y'all, his theory is like the ring. He's carrying this very powerful thing that he's trying to keep away from the bad guys.
It's Lord of the
Uh-oh.
Rings. It's Lord of the Rings.
Uh-oh.
So it's a trick question. It's really Star Trek.
Oh, you always say that.
I don't always. I have a handful of times so that it's Star Trek.
Okay.
And this one is Star Trek because the whole thing behind Star Trek is a lot of these planets that have basically humans, they were all descended from the same thing. There was a seeding of the universe at one point.
That's also like Alien, too.
So the entire Hainish cycle is Star Trek.
It's a little bit
Sorry.
Dune.
Sorry about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely think it's Dune because we've
a little
got
Dune,
yeah, it's definitely Dune-ish because we've got our Kwisatz Haderach
desert
theory
planet.
of simultaneity, desert planet.
Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. This book kind of reminded me of Foundation because they talk a lot about the science, and it's like the fake encyclopedia they're writing that you never know about. And I was like, what's this theory? And they do talk about it, but like not enough for me to get really into it. I'm like, okay, simultaneous. Okay.
Well, I think Ursula is like, this will be over your head. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Red, when you were reading the description of the city, I actually also thought about Foundation. It made me think of Trantor at the beginning of Foundation. When I thought Foundation was going to be more fun than it was, and they were talking about the city, and I was like, "Oh, this book is going to be great." And then I was like, "Oh no!"
Oh,
But the description of the city,
with you now.
when I didn't think of it when I read it, but when you read it, and it was like it just came alive in my mind because of the beautiful way that you read it. I was like, "Oh,
I now want to. I want you to do audiobooks. Have you considered this as a
I would
side
love to do
hustle?
audiobooks.
is there an audiobook
one of my
about Pink Sky?"
There is not an audiobook of Proud Pink Sky. There was for The Giddy Death, which had a really, really amazing voice actor, Fiona Threll. So I haven't got to do one of my own audiobooks in my voice because I really love doing readings. It's like one of my favorite things. And I'm a very nervous kind of introvert, but like when I'm on a stage, I don't know. There's just
Weirdly,
something about that.
Same, because it's you don't quite have to interact with the people you are with,
Yes.
but
yeah.
you are absolutely having an exchange, and it is a fascinating
Exactly.
thing. I am also introvert, and I also feel the same way.
Ah.
It's fun. It's fun. It's like acting. It's just fun.
Yeah.
Well, you're great at it. You get our votes.
Oh,
Yep.
thank you.
I will purchase that audiobook. Please let us know when it comes out.
Sweet. Well, I think that's all we got.
I did want to mention I was on a podcast.
Yeah.
I was on the podcast Picture Me Coding. with the delightful Eric and Mike. And they have a podcast. It's about software. And I don't know anything about software. So that if you listen to their episodes, I mean, you can learn a thing or two about Excel is all I'm saying.
I was just picturing you coding.
Don't picture me coding because I literally
Hacking
can't
the
code.
mainframe.
But these two guys are software guys. Mike in particular is he's an old school computer guy. I'm not calling you old Mike, but you are an old school computer guy. And it's fascinating. Their conversations are really interesting. So they had me on to talk about software and pop culture and how it started because why are they always dystopian? Like, why is it always the machines have come and got us? But it started out by talking about the short story, Better Living Through Algorithms.
Yeah, that's a good story.
And it was a really interesting conversation. And so
I listened to
I recommend that podcast and that episode.
I listened to it when I was on my work trip a couple weeks ago. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
You sounded very smart.
Go listen
and I
to my
thought
friends.
if someone invited me on a podcast where the premise was talking about software, I'd have been like, I'm not a value
That's
add.
why I started with.
But I think you did a really good
I don't know how to tell you guys this, but I don't know anything about stuff.
Windows.
Well, I sounded smart because I literally regurgitated everything we talk about on this podcast. So all of your ideas are in my mouth on that podcast. So anyway, they have a good product to go listen to it. And they never self-promote, so I'm going to do it for them.
Link to it in the show notes.
Okay.
Boop, boop.
All right. Anything else from anybody?
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much
This
for
was
having me. I've had so
delightful.
much fun.
Yay.
It's been really lovely.
Yeah, this is so much fun. And I will. Where do you have a preferred retailer for your book that we could link to in our show notes?
So you can actually buy it direct from the publisher.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, Bywater Books. If you go to Bywater Books website.
Good name, Bywater
I think
Books.
.com. Yeah, it's actually their imprint, Amble Press, because Bywater is largely a lesbian publisher, and then Amble is for wider marginalized LGBTQ people.
Delightful.
So yes, you can buy direct from them. I mean, it's also available in a ton of places online, from big evil corporations to nice little bookstores.
We'll push the little guy, but also say you can get it elsewhere.
Exactly.
All right.
Sweet.
Thank you again so much for joining
Thank you.
us.
Bye.
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 You go, girl. You go, girl. You go, girl. A hilarious podcast.
I'm going to pause really quickly
Dehydrate.
because our producer and my husband, Kevin, is huddled up on the floor. And I just want to make sure, do you need a chair? Are you good?
Teddy sat down, so I couldn't move the chair.
Oh, he can't move the dog.
The
He
dog
can't
is in the
move
way.
dog.
So he's huddled on the floor. Okay. All right. just doing a wellness check.
There's a cat on my lap. Yeah, I can't come
That's where
in
I'm at for the
today.
rest of the podcast.
All right. Sorry. Okay. Back to our goodies.